So hook sizing is a little bit weird. For whatever reason, there's really no standard sizing to hooks. Like you would think a 3/0 for one brand's hook should be the same size as a 3/0 for another brand's hook. It's even worse than that. Within the same brand of hooks, a 3/0 in one model might be different than a 3/0 in another model. So to me, what a 3/0 means is it's bigger than the 2/0 and smaller than the 4/0 within the same hook model series. Now some of them are close, but for that very reason, I like having a couple of rules of thumb for my hooks. So if I don't have a handy Hoagie rigging chart, or if I'm using a new hook that I'm not familiar with or a new plug I'm not familiar with, just a couple rules of thumb. So I'm going to walk through a quick and easy way to size up a treble, also a quick and easy way to size up an inline single. Now, if you're watching this video and it's embedded in a blog post on our Hoagie lure site, you'll know that there's rigging charts and tables below this video. So you can just look at our handy chart and know which hook, which model, pair it, boom, your business. But hook brands vary. You might not be using in this case, a VMC hook, or you might be using a different lure. You're on the boat, you're not on the blog or whatever. But a quick and handy reference for sizing a treble, well, there's two ways. One, you can take the circumference of a treble hook, a loose circumference. It's a handy little trick. And just wrap a tape measure around the hook. You can eyeball it. In this case, this is about 3.5 inches circumference. This is a 5.5 inch Hoagie Charter Grade popper. In this case, it's the long range edition. And so if a treble hook is within 1/2 and 2/3 of the length of the overall hook body, that's a handy rule of thumb. Now another handy rule of thumb is that you want a similar diameter of the treble hook is the lure itself. So in this case, it checks out. So I had two little heuristics with this plug to measure the size of the treble hook, and it checks out. So that's a handy rule of thumb. So let's take a look at rough estimating an inline hook. And so here I have a Hoagie Deep Dive Swimmer, the 5.5 inch version. And so I actually took this hook off the lure to show you. And so one handy reference guide is, sort of the mean average body, circumference of the plug, its girth, is you want to find that spot. And if that hook snugly fits around the plug, or if it almost wants to fit but doesn't quite, it's within 2/3 of the overall width of the plug or its girth, you want either a close fit or an almost fit. And that is a good rule of thumb that this hook is appropriately sized for this plug. And that's just two handy little hook references. You've got the treble, you've got the inline. So now we know how to size a hook for a plug. Now let's talk about hook gap. Now hook gap is important because when you hook a fish, the most important position is you want that cradle position. By cradle position, you want the hook to penetrate the mouth and the fish to be sitting on the bend of the hook, sort of cradled by the hook. So you want to have enough hook gap such that that hook can penetrate, come out the other side, and cradle on the belly of the hook. So, finding a good cradle position on an inline single is a little easier than a treble, because by virtue of just being one hook, the gap is bigger. But at Hoagie, a lot of times we rig our lures with treble hooks, and so we try to find that Goldilocks size where the hook is big enough to have a sufficient cradle opportunity, but small enough where it's not going to impede the action of the lure. And but cradle position can be a little less important with a treble hook because now we've got two prongs in the fish, and so you have more surface area of hook coverage. So even if it's not a perfect cradle position like this hook on a fish, you've got two purchase points as opposed to one purchase point. Sometimes you'll hook a fish in a funny spot with an inline, and it's almost easier to lose a fish in that case, but if it's cradled, it's harder to lose a fish. But so one's not better than the other with hook gap, but rule of thumb is the hook gap on an inline hook is going to be wider than it is on a treble hook, because again, you have redundancy in the treble hook. Doesn't always need to be in that cradle position with a singular hook. Now the last factor is the hook gauge. Now hook gauge is the thickness of the wire that's used to make the hook. So the thicker the gauge, the stronger the hook. The thinner the gauge, the easier it is for that hook to penetrate through the fish. Obviously a thinner gauge hook has less resistance, it's more narrow, so it's going to penetrate the fish easily. The thicker gauge is obviously stronger, and you need a heavier fish with heavier gear and a heavier hook set to drive that thicker gauge with more friction into the fish. Now there is, in Hoagie, in our opinion, there's sort of a Goldilocks level. You want it strong enough for the biggest fish you're going to catch, but thin enough for the mean average of like the smaller to medium sized fish. And so I don't have a micrometer with me, but rule of thumb, you can see we use VMC hooks. They're 4X treble series on most of our plugs, and we've had great luck for decades with this hook, and I don't see changing that hook anytime soon on a treble series. But again, it really depends on what you're targeting. And so at Hoagie, we have 3 classifications of lures. We have our inshore lures, which are true to the name, inshore. Then we have universal lures, which are designed from medium large to very large inshore fish to small to medium size offshore. In our case here in Cape Cod, that'll likely mean tuna, and tuna to say 80 or 100 pounds. And so as you go up with our lures, if you look at a classification, you'll see the universal label on some of our plugs. And universal means that hook has been tested for tuna up to 80 pounds is our measured number. And so again, finding that Goldilocks hook range, 4X is a good strength for us. 4X from one hook company or one hook model can mean a different 4X with a different model within the same company or a different hook company. So it's a little tricky to just read a generic label and know what you're talking about. But here again, I have the VMC treble. They call this a 4X, and that is perfect for our inshore and the larger size for our offshore lures. So bottom line with hooks, you've got the size, the hook gap, again, the space between the point and the hook shank. And lastly, you've got the thickness of the hook gauge. And so by toggling those 3 features, you're going to get just the right size, shape, and strength for the species you're targeting.